Okay, here we have 5 full wet coats of stain. It's nice and rich looking in color. It's got the right tone that I would like. Now is for one of the most critical parts of the process, and that's getting all this wood grain buried in clear coat. I just showed you how we mix the clear. Now it's time to bury this. This is a critical step. Once again, we have to have sufficient clear in order to fill all the low spots, the wood grain, but we also have to have enough build in order to sand off the high to get it down to the low spots, and the low spots have to be above the wood grain. And the reason this is so important is if we sand through that clear, we're going to get into the stain and then the wood. And as soon as you start taking any of that stain off, you're altering the color. And once you do that, it's definitely going to show up as a blemish. You're not going to like it. It will show up. And it's really important to avoid that. So you want to make sure you get a lot of clear on this. How many coats? It varies depending on how wet you get them on. Now here is another very, very important piece of information when first applying these coats of clear. The wood grain contains air pockets in it, deep inside the wood grain, and I guarantee you if you walk up to this shell and start applying full wet coats like we just did with the stain, that air in the wood grain is going to try to escape through the clear. And what's going to happen is you're going to have tiny air bubbles all in your clear. You're going to have thousands upon thousands of them. And you're not going to get them out. You're going to have to sand the clear to get the bubbles out. And how deep do you have to go? Right, to the wood grain where the bubbles are coming from. So these first several coats of clear are going to be very lightly misted on. And we're going to mist this on to give it a little bit of a build, but not create a solid film. And what it's going to do after we get so many coats is going to slowly fill in with the mist in order to what we're doing is avoiding a complete coverage film that would trap air. This way the air has a way to escape. Now, when I've done this previously, it was almost impossible to not get air bubbles. So by misting this on, it's going to greatly reduce that. And if we see any bubbles whatsoever, we're going to get to them as fast as we can with our finger, and we're going to smear those bubbles in. Now when we smear that in, yes, it is going to create a little bit of a defect in the surface of the clear. You'll probably see it, but that's still nowhere near as bad as the bubbles, because you can always fill that in with more clear and sand it smooth. So we're going to go ahead and get started, apply our first mist coat of clear. This splash for just a minute, which means dry, and you can see already, we'll get closer and I'll show you where there are small fibers of wood sticking out, and the clear mist will actually stick to these fibers and show as like a large strand, and we have several right here, and those aren't important because we're going to sand all that off anyway. So we'll let this flash for a moment. is only our second mist coat. You can see it's starting to get a little bit of a shine to it now. We want to walk around the shell, and you're going to have to get really close and look for any air bubbles. Okay, this is after the second mist coat of clear. You can see our seam right here, right down the middle. And I stopped just to show you the little hairballs I was talking about. If you can see them down in here, can you see all these standing up? And if you take it and you move your finger across, you'll see you can wipe them away. So once you're clear, after you get like your second mist coat and you start to see those, you can let this flash off real good to where it's not sticky to the touch. It's dry enough to where you could drag your finger across it without moving the clear. And once it's dried like that, you can take your tack rag that you had and you can start tacking this off. And you want to go ahead and tack some of those off, and you can do it this early after the second coat to just kind of get rid of most of those. But once you start getting your wet coats on there, you're not going to want to tack it at all. So like say after your second to third mist coat, you start seeing those little balls popping up, and it's just small pieces of the wood grain sticking up that the clear attaches to. You can take your tack rag, tack those off, and then you're ready for full wet coats.
Giggity giggity, giggity goo. Stick around.